Chicago was built on marshland, and after human settlement where the city became larger and more populated, serious problems started to arise. And by the 1850s, when the city had grown into a major lake port and industrial hub, the marsh that it was built on led to mud becoming a major issue. The streets started to become a quagmire, leading to unsanitary conditions, which in turn led to the outbreak of cholera. Unlike many other cities, Chicago sat just a few feet above the water level of Lake Michigan, where the water flowed down. So they needed to build a system that drained all of Chicago's stormwater and sewage. That enterprise would require a large amount of digging, and after much discussion, they deemed that it was far too expensive. However, a solution was needed fast, because by 1854, cholera had killed more than 5% of the population. Other remedies were then put forward in order to try and combat the situation, while they first tried to grade the streets so that the water would run into Chicago River, but that failed. They then placed planks over the muddy ground, but after a short while, the planks started to warp and then rot. After 6 consecutive years of cholera and dysentery epidemics, in February 1855, they were forced to establish the Board of Sewerage Commissioners. The board needed to come up with a plan to solve its serious mud problem and hired a 42-year-old engineer from Boston by the name of Ellis Sylvester Chesbrough. After studying the problem, Chesbrough first recommended installing a storm sewer system, but because the city was only 3 to 4 feet above the level of Lake Michigan, the underground sewers would never drain properly into the river, so he came up with an ingenious and impossible sounding solution. He said the city of Chicago must be raised. Depending on the location of the building, they were raised up to various levels, and for obvious reasons, those streets that were close to the river needed to be raised higher to about 10 feet. The job of raising the city was never going to be a quick fix, and over a period of almost 20 years, Chicago's buildings were lifted up 4 to 14 feet. Higher foundations were built beneath them, with the storm sewers being placed on top of the streets. The streets were then filled up to the level of front doors of the raised buildings. However, for the much larger buildings, more engineering ingenuity needed to be called upon, and in 1857, a 26-year-old engineer from New York by the name of George Mortimer Pullman devised a method that entailed hundreds of men turning thousands of large jack screws at the same time. Pullman had 6,000 jack screws put under buildings and hired 600 men to take charge of 10 jacks each. The whole process needed hundreds of men to work in perfect unison, and on the signal, each man turned the screws on his 10 jacks 1 notch. The building went up a fraction of an inch. This process was repeated again and again over 4 days. As the lifting was being carried out, temporary timbers were placed under the buildings and new foundations constructed. Then the buildings were lowered into place, and all of this was done with an amazing amount of smoothness, as business inside the buildings carried on as per normal. Certain buildings were treated in various ways depending on their size and structure. The Tremont House was one of Chicago's most eminent hotels and was raised inch by inch over several days as guests, including a US Senator, resided inside. An entire half-block of Lake Street was also lifted in one huge engineering feat. In January 1858, the first masonry building in Chicago, which was 4 stories tall, was raised 70 foot and weighing 750 tons. A brick structure situated at the northeast corner of Randolph Street and Dearborn Street was lifted on 200 jack screws to its new height of 6 feet 2 inches higher than the old one. All this was completed without the slightest injury to the building. Robbins Building was an iron structure that was situated on the corner of South Water Street and Wells Street, which was 150 feet long and 80 feet wide and was 5 stories high, so this was a very heavy building. In November 1865, they lifted not only the building but also the 230 feet of stone sidewalk outside. They managed to complete this task without any cracks or other damage. Many smaller structures, especially houses, were simply moved to new locations. The raising of the city was done in such a manner that it did not appear to disturb daily life. Unfortunately, by solving one major problem, they created another serious problem, where sewage started to pour into Lake Michigan, which in turn started to pollute the city's only source of drinking water. So, after amazing feats of engineering to lift the city of Chicago, another massive engineering problem then ensued, where they had to reverse the Chicago River. The reversal of the river was a massive public works effort that was needed to save the Chicago region from waterborne diseases caused by sewage contamination of its drinking water supply, which was Lake Michigan. A heavy rainstorm in 1885 caused sewage to be flushed into the lake, resulting in typhoid, cholera and dysentery. This caused an epidemic that resulted in the deaths of 12% of Chicago's 750,000 residents. In 1889, the state of Illinois created the sanitary districts of Chicago, and their task was to safeguard Chicago's water supply. They constructed canals to make the Chicago River flow backward, away from the lake. The system of 3 canals was built from 1892 to 1922. They were able to reverse the flow in the Chicago River towards the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico, diverting sewage away from the Lake Michigan water supply. Water pulled from the lake flushed Chicago's riverborne sewage and provided dilution and aeration. As Chicago resumed its rapid growth with the canals in place, their self-cleansing ability was quickly outstripped by the sewage loading. This led to the district implementing large-scale modern sewage treatment plants beginning in 1922 through to 1931. After its completion, waterborne disease rates quickly and dramatically improved, and its water supply system was soon regarded as being one of the safest in the world. With its water source made safe and dependable by the canals, Chicago and the regions grew and prospered rapidly. The reversal of the Chicago River was the largest municipal earth-moving project ever completed, and was hailed as a monumental engineering achievement. But yet again, by solving one problem, they again created another, as you cannot interfere with nature without serious side effects. Although the reversal of the Chicago River succeeded and protected Lake Michigan from Chicago's sewage and prevented thousands of people from dying from waterborne illnesses, it was not a perfect solution, and in the years and decades that followed, the engineering feat resulted in the flooding of farms downstream and opened the gates, which in turn introduced certain invasive species such as carp and other pests, and polluted areas as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. In all 3 cases, amazing problems were overcome by human ingenuity, but on each occasion, one problem solved was another problem created. Needless to say, Chicago is now thriving and the 3rd most populous city in the US.